The Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds,
Ingenia Herbicide,
and Cruiser Max Vibrance Beans.
Bernard Tobin here on the Soybean School, catching up with Horst Bohner, O'Mafra's soybean specialist. Horst, how's it going?
Excellent. Good to be with you.
Hey Horst, we've seen a lot of frost events the last few days across Ontario. A lot of guys wondering how their crop is shaping up and what may come of it. First question to you is, how susceptible are soybeans to frost?
Well, of course, the growing point is above the ground basically as soon as the bean emerges, right? And so, of course, traditionally, that's why we planted soybeans after corn, because that's what kills them, a frost when the beans are up, unlike corn where the growing point is below the ground for quite a while. So generally we say -2 degrees Celsius, no problem. They can handle that. -3, we start to get really worried pretty quick. Now, some growers have reported that even at -4 for a few hours, the beans can come out of that and survive. But a lot of it has to do with the specific situation as well, right?
So, Horst, for growers who are assessing their fields now, what do they need to be looking at? I mean, you've seen a couple of interesting scenarios right here in this field. Obviously, no frost, but a lot we can learn from looking at this.
Well, one thing, if the field is like this, where the beans are just emerging, of course, a lot of them aren't actually out of the ground yet. Like you can see this little bean here is just starting to come out of the ground. So this one can handle more frost than these who are, of course, completely exposed. So sometimes I find when we get into a scenario where it's obvious that there's been frost, you can see that tissue damage, we make the decision too quickly to condemn a field because some of them are still emerging. And the other thing is, of course, because those cotyledons have a lot of sugars in them and oils and fats, the freezing point is lower than 0, right? So -2, 2.5, and the growing point is right between those two cotyledons, and it's kind of protected for a little bit. So even if the cotyledons are frozen off, if that growing point has been protected, new growth will come out of that. And sometimes we get that, what I call the Y bean, you get 2 growing points. And the only reason I'm saying that is you can't judge a plant right away. Let's say we had a frost last night here. You can't tell today, even tomorrow. I think you gotta wait at least 5 days, sometimes as much as 7, to see if there's new growth. And if there's new growth, the good news is most of those plants, the vast majority, if there's new growth, they end up yielding just as well as beans that haven't had a frost. In fact, I was talking to somebody who just a couple days ago who had pretty severe frost a few years ago, and you know what? He said those fields yielded the best out of all his fields. Now, obviously, it comes down to how many plants survived, right?
And that's the question. The final question on replant, what's that population need to be to soldier on or do a replant?
Yeah, so if you've made an assessment, you've waited those few days, I just don't know how else to do it, you got to wait a few days. The number we use is 90,000 plants per acre as kind of our cutoff point, right, for most of Ontario. On heavy clays, even a little higher, before we would even think about replanting. Now, row spacing has something to do with it. If it's a nice, consistent, even stand in 30-inch rows, we can go lower. We can maybe go as low as 70,000 plants. But in that range is where we're going to have to thicken things up. Or in some cases, if the field was, at the first trifoliate, even some of them were almost there. That first trifoliate was coming out, and they're gone. Well, you start over with a full seeding rate, and you just plant on top. And unfortunately, that's the way it is for some fields, yeah.